everyone. I am Hayley Hoffman, the CEO and founder of Dandi. I'm joined by Dr. Aly Cohen. So we have Hayley, and Aly, which makes it really fun. And so thank you so much, Aly, for joining us today. And we're really excited to have you here. And for those who are new to Fab Fridays and Dandi, I just wanted to share that Dandi is a conscious beauty firm bridging ingredient companies doing good for people and planet, and the brands that have the reach to create that change one person at a time. And the Fab Fridays are here for personal and professional development to help expand our consciousness in our everyday lives. And so we really were interested in your work as a rheumatologist and an integrative therapist. And so can you share a little bit about that with us, like what you do and your background? We would love to hear.
Yeah, so thanks for having me, first of all, and all your listeners for being here. So really, I started off as a conventional physician, went through all the regular medical training. I ended up going on to a fellowship off of internal medicine into rheumatology, which is immune system diseases, rheumatoid lupus, Lyme disease, a bunch of arthritis types of issues. And I still didn't feel that I was sharing what I thought really was healing out there. I knew I had instincts that living a lifestyle that was clean and exercise and good sleep was really beneficial, but I never saw that promoted, discussed in my training. So I ended up getting involved and getting a full scholarship actually with Dr. Andrew Weil and his colleagues at the Andrew Weil Center for Integrative Medicine in Tucson, Arizona. And it's an online and in-person program. And that was a 2-year program with board certification. So I got that really great 2 years of training that taught me that there are other things besides medications to help people heal, that nutrition and food matters to the human body, that sleep matters, stress matters, that there are areas of Ayurvedic medicine and ancient Chinese medicine that all have thousands of years of really great, resources, and the ability to put all of these things together really was remarkable. And then, of course, environmental health came into my life haphazardly, as I talk about in my book that just came out, that my dog got really ill about 9 years ago when I was a new mom. I had young kids running around. And I soon began to understand or try to figure out what was going on with making this young puppy so ill. And that's how I started to kind of figure out that environment played a really key role in a variety of illnesses, but it started with trying to figure out what happened to my dog. So that's how this whole world exploded in environmental health.
Okay, well, that's really interesting. So all of your background as you've been in school as a doctor, a student of medicine, a student of science. You're definitely qualified to be a scientist. And so can you explain a little bit more, unpack what you mean by environmental, the environmental exposures and how that links with your dog, and what was your process in looking at that?
So I didn't even know that there was such a thing called environmental health. I didn't even know what that meant. I never thought that environment really played that much of a role. Maybe diet, maybe exercise, but beyond that, which is, by the way, not even taught in medical school even now, nothing on nutrition really. I think 5 hours on average in 2020, we're teaching medical students about nutrition, which is absurd. But I never understood about 9 or 10 years ago, whenever my dog was ill. And as I started to try to figure out what was making this dog, who had autoimmune hepatitis, which is rather ironic since I'm an autoimmune disease doctor for humans, it was particularly, unsettling. But as I was trying to figure out what might have triggered his young immune system, he was a puppy, 4.5 years old, to have this horrible disease that's so rare in dogs, I looked at his drinking water. I was looking into his dog food, whether it was contaminated. I was looking into his flea and tick collars and all the goo that we would put on behind his neck to get rid of fleas. I was really interested in this plastic toy that he never dropped out of his mouth. And as I started trying to understand each of these types of exposures just by instinct, I started to open a Pandora's box of understanding about how little regulation, how limited regulation there is in the United States for human beings when it comes to environmental chemicals. I just really couldn't believe it. And here I was, a practicing physician, finding out about endocrine disrupting chemicals and how they work, and how our water system is actually quite filthy due to the, regulations that are so limited, but also the old infrastructure and all of the new chemicals that have just exploded since World War II. So as I was figuring out what he was potentially exposed to, I was understanding how humans are just really, really in trouble in the United States and really around the world, since we're a global, industry of industrial and commercial chemicals now. And so that's really how this unfolded. And my interest was really quite organic, in the sense that I didn't expect this to become a thing, a career, a life path, a passion. I just went with it. And so I kind of dedicate everything I do to my dog Truxton, because I do believe, honestly, as I write in the introduction, the whole story, I do believe that had he lived to a ripe old age that a golden retriever lives to, maybe 13, 12, if we're lucky, I would not be sitting here talking to you. I would have just not really thought that there was a reason to dive into this topic. And it's quite shocking how environment affects human health.
Yeah, it is interesting that that's not taught in school at all, medical school. And I would agree that it is a newer conversation. It's even new to the beauty industry, trying to understand those environmental aspects. And I think that's why we're here today, is to glean from your knowledge. And you do have a new book out called A Guidebook to Non-Toxic Living. And so I would love for you to share about your book. And you shared a little bit of the inspiration of it, but to go into that and what that framework looks like.
Yeah, well, we named it NonToxic. I'll hold it up. I can never remember if it's backwards or if an Instagram is backwards.
No, I can see it.
Oh, you
I can see
it.
it.
Okay.
Yeah.
My kids made fun of me the first time I did an Instagram live, and they're like, "Mom, the book is not going to be forward; it's going to be backwards." So I get abused at home. But anyway, the book is called NonToxic: Guide to Living Healthy in a Chemical World. And the reason I really thought very, very strongly about the title was because I wanted this book to be empowering. I didn't want it to be really just, you look at the cover and you just want to go hide. I wanted people to understand that there is a guidebook, and this is the first of its kind that I've ever seen, where it gives the story of the problems in terms of each chemical, or cosmetics in one chapter. We do, drinking water as an entire chapter. Personal care goods. We have a whole chapter on fabrics and furniture. We have a whole chapter on getting pregnant and what to think about in terms of either getting your body cleaner or even during pregnancy or after. We really, Dr. Vamsala and I, who's my co-author, we really thought hard and long about the idea that the topic, since it's such a daunting topic to most and overwhelming, has to be something that's written in a way that's empowering and doesn't cause people to shut down or create resistance. And I think we did a decent job of this, where we present the problem at the beginning of each chapter and make it almost like a novel, kind of interesting historical facts, but then we get into the what to do. And I think that's what's been limited in so much of what we're hearing in the news. We hear about drinking water contamination almost every night. We hear about air pollution issues, which, you're in California, whether it's, disasters or fires, but it could also just be combustion and humanity. So how we handle these things is really key, and giving people really legitimate references and studies, and showing them that when you make lifestyle changes and changes in your product choice, you can actually reduce those actual industrial commercial chemicals that are harmful, like endocrine disruptors, in your blood, in your urine, in your breast milk. And there are studies to show this. And that's what we wanted to embrace, is the what to do, and teach people that they can do it at their own pace.
That's really, really helpful. And I would agree. I haven't seen anything like that. And those are some of the questions that I've had over time. Here in California, we have Proposition 65, which people know it as that placard, that warning sign. And so they think of it more in marketing terms. On the research that I've done about Prop 65, it is all about the groundwater and the protection of the water. And so I'm not sure that's a lot of things that people really know or understand when they think about Proposition 65. And then also for like California, the produce here that's grown in California, I think I think I've heard the statistic is around 80. It supplies 80% of the U.S.'s produce supply. So when you think about groundwater feeding the country, it is very, very important that we have tight regulations around the water that goes into our food, feeding America. And I heard you speak last night, on the Women's Voices for the Earth, which is a really also very interesting organization that is bringing up topics that I haven't heard anywhere else. And you talked about this baseline. We have this baseline inflammation. And so can you share a little bit about that concept of inflammation and the importance of reducing the endocrine disruptors? What does that look like from your perspective as a physician?
So I'm an autoimmune disease specialist and an internist. So I see all of the chronic health conditions that we talk about with COVID in terms of inflammatory response: obesity, diabetes, heart disease, high blood pressure, autoimmune disease. So I guess to start with, we have over 90,000 chemicals now. I mean, we're now up to the point where up to 90,000 commercial and industrial chemicals that are allowed on the market for any of the products that we use, whether it's cosmetics or cleaning products, whether it's food industry chemicals, which now have about anywhere from 4,000 to 10,000 food additive chemicals allowed in our food, processed food. And we've evolved for only about 4.5 million years. I mean, only, right? Somewhere between 2.5 and 4.5 million years. And all of these 90,000 chemicals that I just mentioned really have only been added to our lives, to modern humans' exposure in the last 200 years, which is a blip in time. And, you know, if we know anything about humans and adaptation, we know it takes time for us to build detox processes and to build, ways to cope with our environment. And what I'm seeing and what the data, shows, epidemiology shows, is that we're having a rise of chronic illness in this country and around the world. Mostly diabetes and obesity, but certainly high blood pressure and autoimmune disease. About 10% of the American population has some type of autoimmune disease, which is unheard of. We also have cancers that are on the rise that are mostly endocrine, not mostly, but many are endocrine sensitive or hormone sensitive cancers. And so the question becomes, this can't all be random genetic mutations that came out of nowhere. This is environment. This is environmental exposures. Breast cancer, for instance, 90% of breast cancers are associated with exposures to environment, whether it's lifestyle issues or it's just chemicals like benzene and formaldehyde and a variety of other chemicals that have been tested. But only about 10% are really basically genetic, like BRCA genes and those and different molecules of BRCA genes. So there's a variety of BRCA genes actually. And so really what we're seeing here is the human body, and we now have evidence to show that inflammatory markers are elevated in people who are exposed to a lot of environmental chemicals. And that includes poor diet and processed foods on a regular basis. It includes contaminated drinking water and certainly cosmetics that we love to put on our skin, and feminine care products. A lot of what Women's Voices really taught me, which was remarkable, was the fact that our exposures intravaginally through feminine care products and tampons over the course of a woman's lifetime is really a huge route of exposure and causes a large body burden. And so this inflammation that's now been found, a lot of innate human primal markers of immunity are also now linked as well to the development of these chronic diseases. And so we're walking around with baseline inflammation, and then we get these diseases that eventually happen over time with exposures. And it turns out, especially with COVID, as we were talking last night, COVID, everyone can get coronavirus. It's an infection, but it's the people who have more comorbidities, who have added illnesses, chronic illnesses that I listed, have higher risk for a worse immune response to the coronavirus. So everyone can get it, but people actually get sick from being sick underneath it all, in terms of their baseline inflammatory markers. So it argues yet again that lifestyle matters, choices matter, that if we can reduce exposures, we can reduce the development of diabetes, infertility, autoimmune disease, heart disease, high blood pressure, growth and development issues in children and newborns. And that comes a lot from what we do pre-pregnancy, during pregnancy, after, and of course the entire lifespan. So, it kind of unfortunately confirms the idea that lifestyle, diet, and being healthy really matters, especially in
Yeah.
this environment, this infection. And, we didn't know in the beginning. We really didn't know. In the
Mm-hmm.
beginning, we were also shell shocked. We didn't know who was going to be the ones that got sickest. And that had to be teased out over the first several months, where we started to see between Italy and the data in Italy, there was
Mm-hmm.
this consistency of that the more comorbid conditions you have, the more likely you would end up on a ventilator or unfortunately dead. So, it's this whole
Yeah.
idea, it's an exaggerated response to what's going on, I think, over the last several decades. But here we're seeing it kind of compacted into a very short period of time where we're really, it's obvious. And then of course there's environmental justice issues and health equity and,
Mm-hmm.
all the different proportions of population that are getting sicker and why minorities and African Americans. It's a really tough time right now to tease out.
Yeah, it is. There's a lot of different topics and areas that you can tackle, but when we look at the chemical exposure, and as you said, in the environment, and I love how you bring it back to like anthropology too, as a human species in our development or adaptation over time. That's something that we don't always talk about in the cosmetics industry either, is what, as a species, what does that look like, and how are we reacting and responding and coexisting with all of the newness and things that we're putting on our bodies. And we have about 10 more minutes, but I wanted to talk next about some other things that are in your book. So non-toxic living definitely has to do with diet, exercise, or rest, the things that we put on our skin, and the things that we're ingesting. But as Dandi Day is a conscious beauty firm, and we try to be mindful and are helping everybody that we work with to take a more mindful and conscious approach. And so I would love for you to talk about toxic relationships and toxic people that I think is something very interesting that people aren't talking about either, when you're at that integrative approach to what does a non-toxic life look like.
Well, it's interesting from a medical perspective. We have plenty of good evidence now, especially from childhood trauma and studies from Sweden, which was huge, the ACE study, that people who have been exposed to childhood trauma particularly have a higher rate of developing several autoimmune diseases. And particularly lupus was teased out as one of the one that had the strongest data. And it's not that we don't have enough data on this. We've seen this in the Dutch hunger with World War II, and starvation, in utero exposure, and women who were starved and who were pregnant and were starved and had not enough food to eat during World War II. They followed those fetuses out into adulthood compared to those who had enough food, and there was definitely health-related issues that were related to the stress in utero. And we've seen this in other major studies in terms of stress, certainly with pregnancy. But the idea that human beings, again, back to an anthropology perspective, the fact that we don't, we're living at such a level of exhaustion, anxiety, through social interactions, political. I mean, it broke me up, this whole political, it's still breaking me up, in terms of how divided we are as a country. It makes me very sad. But it also goes into, here we have thousands of people, dying or becoming so severely ill. And so the stress that we're experiencing now is all the time. We've evolved, I mean, from a place where we would only be stressed if we were at a watering hole and a buffalo came in and wanted some water, and it would scare us to run away, right? I mean, we had intermittent stressors. Now we live, instead of going like this back in, during evolution, we're literally living up here and no one can come down unless they fall off, literally. So, part of the recommendations I make, in addition to what people put on and around their bodies, their choices that they make for products, or the things that they keep away from their skin, which is just as valuable as what they do put on, I do really emphasize quite a bit stress reduction, good
Mm-hmm.
quality sleep. Sleep is so critical, especially we have fluid around our brains that help to clear out environmental chemicals while we sleep. That's new data from around 2013. Some great studies on that. But we want to really think about noise pollution. Noise pollution and heart disease has been well studied. People who live near airports, it's just remarkable. And
Interesting.
people who live in cities experiencing light and noise pollution. So there's all these environmental factors that create environmental health as a whole. EMF radiation, we have an entire chapter in NonToxic, I'll hold it up again, that talks about not taking people's toys away. We all love our tech toys. We're on a tech toy right now. We have our phones that we love and are kind of can't live without, but it's how we live with them in modern living. How do we live with all these options for processed foods and try to avoid them and navigate food and read labels? We want people to
Mm-hmm.
understand that. We also want people to understand how to make your own cosmetics. We have do-it-yourself recipes for very, very simple things. Do-it-yourself cleaning products. Knowing the difference between disinfection and cleaning is really quite critical
Mm-hmm.
now, especially with COVID,
Interesting.
because of the differences in the amount of harmful chemicals we can get exposed to. So we just really hoping that people will look at this as an eye-opening experience, but nothing that scares people away. And that to keep in mind, since I put in a whole chapter on detoxing, it included noise pollution and what you need to know. It included sleep, exercise, sauna, how they all work, how our
Mm-hmm.
physiology, how we evolved with really phenomenal parts and physiology to help remove a vast array of harmful chemicals. But unfortunately, some things are not as protective as we wish they were, like the placenta. And we have a chapter again on pregnancy and really discussing how that matters in terms of our modern day environment. So I even named my education platform where I post on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, The Smart Human, for a reason, because I was an anthropology minor and this plays a role in everything I do. So I wanted a name that encompassed every
Mm-hmm.
culture,
Mm-hmm.
religion, skin color, economic background. I wanted us to know that we are humans and that when you make good decisions, you will be the smart human.
Yes.
So that was really important to me when I named that platform. So I hope people will follow on The Smart Human.
Yes, I hope so too. You have so many incredible insights and experience, education, and just the curiosity to continue going and finding answers and asking more questions. And I think that's one of the things as scientists is that we should be inspired to always ask more questions and to investigate and come together. So I really, really appreciate you spending part of your afternoon with us, and we will list out your book, Non-Toxic Living, and have it available on all of our posts and recaps and things so people can go and buy it. And I look forward to reading through it as well. So thank you again. And Dr. Cohen, I would like to ask, what is something that you're grateful for?
Well, that's a good question as we come upon Thanksgiving. I'm thankful for good health. Every morning I get up to exercise and I really get nervous if I'm going to have trouble breathing or if I'm going to not be able to do what I want to do because I might have contracted coronavirus from my kids or, from my patients. And I think it's really brought a level of grace and appreciation to my life. And hopefully it's not short-lived like so much in our lives is, right? But thank you for asking, because that's really the biggest thing I think in my life right now is just really being appreciative of the means that we have to stay healthy, that we're not
Yeah.
essential workers. I feel for all those folks, doctors and colleagues, nurses that are on the front lines right now. We were dealing with it a few months ago, and unfortunately, New Jersey's getting back into it. So I
Yeah.
feel for all the healthcare providers that are out there. And so, yeah, that's what I'm grateful for every day, that I get up and I can breathe and I feel healthy, and my kids, my husband.
Well, I know that health is something that we're not taking for granted these days, and I too feel the same. So we'll be well, make it a great day.
Thank you so
And
much for having me.
I absolutely look forward to future collaborations and hearing from you in the future.